Yeah, let's start. Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, recently in the London Zoo, one of the richest and probably most well-funded zoos in the world, what happened was that a tiger was blinded. He was blinded because of children playing with glass, and this happened in one of the best zoos in the world. We tell you this can happen in every zoo, and it does happen in every zoo. Today's side proposition is going to ban all zoos. What we're going to do is have a buffer time. We're going to have zoo animals shifted slowly to natural reserves and natural habitats which are away from main cities. And we're going to do this in a particular time period so that each animal has the time to adapt to the natural reserve. It's not going to be a sudden movement. It's not going to be an impulsive overnight ban. What are we going to prove to you today? Today we're going to prove to you that animals have rights and that these rights are important and cannot be violated. Secondly, we're going to prove to you that zoos by nature do violate these rights and natural reserves are an perfect alternative to this. We're going to prove this to you to three main arguments. The first being the importance of animal rights and the responsibility that we as humans have to protect them. Secondly, we're going to talk to you about how zoos do inherently infringe upon these rights. And my second speaker is going to elaborate on how our policy protects endangered animals. This brings me to my first point as to why animal rights are important. So today's side proposition tells you that animals do have rights because they are living, breathing beings. They're living creatures. They experience the same emotions that you and I do. They experience the sadness and the happiness, but most of all, they experience the pain that we put them through when we lock them in a cage. They experience the pain when owners beat them up because they cannot train fast enough, they cannot adapt to performance fast enough. When a mother loses her child, today she feels hurt, so does the zoo animal, so does the animal when her child is hurt. No, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, humans, just because we may be more intellectual than those animals, cannot assume a superiority over these animals, right? We cannot take animals away from their natural habitats and put them into cages for the sole purpose of our entertainment. That is something that we as human beings should not do and cannot do for the main reason that it is unethical. What we must understand today is that these animals are wild animals. It is their nature to want to be free to roam. The moment you're restricting their nature and their livelihood by putting them in a cage, not only are you simply restricting their freedom to move, you're restricting their life. Because when an animal, a creature that is wild, is not allowed to move, they die. They are traumatized. Their mental and physical health is affected. Yeah.
Will you ban non-vegetarianism? That is to say, will you ban people from eating any kind of meat at all?
We will not ban non-vegetarianism because we tell you that there are ways where non-veg meat is obtained through a normal manner. We tell you that there are manners where the animal is not tortured, the animal is not both mentally and physically tortured. Getting non-vegetarian meat and torturing an animal, taking it away from its habitat and killing it in zoos is inherently wrong. Of course, we're against treating animals badly to get to that meat. But we tell you today that we're against treating animals wrongly. And if that means getting, if non-vegetarian, if you're getting the meat by means of treating that animal badly, then yes, we are against that. Today, I come to my second point to talk to you as to why zoos, by nature, can never be respectful of animal rights. Because what do zoos look like today? Zoos are in the middle of cities. They're in the middle of populated cities where there is noise, pollution, and an influx of many children and people coming in day in and day out to stare at these animals, to pet these animals. And we tell you that that is what a generic zoo does look like. It looks like a child coming in, screaming and getting joy from holding a snake whose venom has been removed for the happiness of that little child who can do without it. We tell you that that is unethical and that is wrong. No, thank you. What do people expect when they go to a zoo? What do children and adults alike expect when they go to a zoo? They do not want to see an animal sleeping. They want a performance. They want to be able to interact with that animal. And we tell you that that is both harmful for the mental and physical health of an animal, right? Because people are looking for this performance and they're looking for this act, which is why what happens is that owners have an incentive to provide this act. They have an incentive to make this performance happen, make this act look more magical, so that more people are attracted, right? And what do they do when they want this performance? What do they do when they want to have animals to act in that certain behavior? They alter the natural behavior of an animal. They train that animal to be something that it's not. And if an animal is too slow in adapting to that performance, if that animal is not able to adapt to that training and performance, what happens is that animal is beaten, the animal is starved, the animal is not allowed to have his or her own dignity. Today, a lion requires 20 hours of sleep a day. In a zoo, do they get this? No, because they need to be awake for at least 8 hours for the enjoyment of other people at the cost of their own life and their own health. And we tell you that is wrong. And while this essentially happens in all zoos, public or private, I'm going to be talking about private owners in just a minute. Yeah.
Will you ban pets?
Like we've told you time and time again, we care about the rights of animals. The moment when you harm your pet and you kill your pet, of course we care. Of course we care if you're harming that animal. Of course we do. But at the point at which you're looking after your pet, we're fine with it. But the moment you're harming it, we're not. And we tell you today that zoos are not like pets because you cannot keep a check on them. Because of this incentive for profit, as nature, zoos cannot be caring for their animals. Zoos are by nature exploitative of these animals, and it's not like a pet which is looked after by homeowners, right? So we tell you that private owners have a greater profit incentive to make these zoos more appealing to the people. To get more people to come, what do? To get more people to come, they lower their prices, they make it cheaper, and by doing this, they cut down on the cost spent for the safety of animals. They cut down on the cost spent for the security of the animals, and we tell you because these people care only about profits and not about the animals' health. Now, why are national parks the perfect alternative for the short term at least to these zoos? Because these are away from cities. These are away from heavy populations. These are not driven by incentives to make the animal perform, because these are vast spaces with trees and grasses where the animal can actually be free, where the animal can get close to their actual habitat where they have the time to adapt. We're not for simply releasing the animal out into the wild and letting them be killed. We're for allowing them to take their time to get acclimatized to their natural habitat. And we believe that natural parks are the perfect way to do this because it protects the animal. Today, we have proved to you that animals do have rights, and because zoos violate these basic rights, they need to be banned.
7-minute speeches, right?
For them, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, side opposition seems to have confused what exactly a zoo is with what a circus is. We from side op come here and tell you that A zoo is not a circus. A zoo is not some place where animals are beat up, where animals are put through this torturous training that they talk about to put up a performance to please their crowds. A zoo is not a place where a ringmaster exists and whips the lion into standing on a stool to perform a certain trick for its audiences. Now, what we from side opposition stand for are zoos with sufficient open spaces for these animals to roam about in, with zoos that feed these animals well enough, that keep them healthy, and provide them with enough time away from humans. All right, this is the kind of model, these are the kinds of zoos that we stand for. All right, now moving on. We tell you that zoos often perform an important duty in terms of saving and promoting the lives of endangered animals. All right, these endangered animals out in the wild cannot survive on their own because their survival is inherently a problem in this day and age. Why? We tell you because of there are certain animals that face man-made problems like climate change, like polar bears that find it increasingly more difficult to survive out in the Arctic. We tell you there are animals like the rhino that find it increasingly difficult to survive out in the savannah because of poaching, because of hunting, because of people wanting their horns, because we tell you that there are elephants that are killed every day just because people want their tusks, people want their ivory, just because the Chinese believe that the ivory is an aphrodisiac. We tell you that there are plenty of animals that find it difficult to live out in the open, out in the wild, like they tell you. When we tell you the zoos perform an important duty in keeping them alive and keeping this race, this species going on. All right. Now, secondly, we tell you that zoos often keep these animals well fed and healthy for the simple reason that zoos have a monetary and social incentive to keep these animals healthy. Because we tell you that zoos operate on a profit basis, because zoos collect a certain fee from its visitors and from the people visiting the zoo. We tell you that it's in the zoo's interest to keep these animals healthy, to keep these animals functioning, to keep them well fed, to make sure that these animals are not tortured, to make sure that these animals don't die of starvation or are malnourished as they claim. Because also we tell you that zoos are such an integral part of the tourism culture of any place that they are, that it's often an incentive for the government to invest in these zoos and to keep these zoos accountable to the standards that we stand for. All right. Furthermore, we tell you that zoos often breed these endangered animals and other animals. They send these animals to other zoos, and we tell you that they help keep the population going and the population up. All right. Now, we tell you that the same profit that they talk about that is inherently bad for these animals is actually good, because this, as we've told you, is the only thing that's keeping the zoos accountable and making sure that they take care of these animals. Now, our second argument is that these zoos often help create awareness and generate sympathy for these endangered animals and these causes. We tell you that zoos often have awareness programs running for endangered animals. They have placards outside these shelters that often tell a story, like say Mohan the tiger was caught by a hunter and then later recovered or later saved from this hunter. And we tell you that these get people to invest in these animals, to invest in their stories, to attach themselves to these animals. And we tell you, no, I'll take it later. We tell you that they often have other programs like petting stations and all of those, which are more visceral to people than just seeing a tiger on Nat Geo. We tell you because often on these television shows, the problem seems distant. All of these seem so far away. It seems like it's not. It seems often that it's not a problem in itself. All right. At the point in time that you're interacting with a tiger, that you're seeing it roam around in a natural habitat in suffering space, we tell you that people are more likely to invest in this cause and think about it and talk about it and work for it. All right. Also, we tell you for the simple reason that more people are willing to go to the zoo for the simple reason of its promotion as an attraction, of the promotion of the narrative of it being an attraction, than people watching Nat Geo or Discovery Science or other TV shows and other videos and investing in these programs that aim to save these endangered animals. And this creates more sympathy, which is a tangible benefit on our side of the house. Go.
What specific purpose do national parks serve?
So the kind of zoos that we stand for are not very different from the national parks that they are advocating for. The kind of zoos that we stand for are zoos that provide sufficient space, feed them well, that provide them time away from from humans and all of that. So we fail to see how that stands in this debate. Now, moving on to a more principled argument, we tell you that animals in general are not extended the same rights as we as humans extend to other fellow humans. We're fine with taking away rights such as right to dignity and the freedom of movement from these animals simply because we extend these rights to humans because they claim these rights. We have no proof of sentience from these animals, and therefore we assume that they live these utilitarian lives. All right, that they live to just get food one day and move on and wake up the next. That they get food the next day and move on to wake up the next. All right, we tell you that these animals, from what we've seen, do live these utilitarian lives, which is why we're fine with not extending to them this right of dignity. Again, because we've observed them to be living in this utilitarian sense, we're also fine with taking away their freedom of movement because a lion does not need the entire savannah to survive. It just needs sufficient space, which we on side off seem fine with providing them. All right. Now, what we've told you from side off is why we're fine with taking away these certain rights, why we stand for the zoos that we do, why these zoos often have a vested interest in keeping these animals alive and going, and why these zoos aren't these circuses that SideGov seems to think they are, and why they don't often harm these animals and they have a vested interest in keeping them alive and keeping them well fed, in not beating them up. All right. For all of these reasons, we're extremely proud to oppose them.
Team opposition today lost this debate when they did not look at the biggest alternative that we gave you, national parks. First, let's answer the question as to what national parks do. We have things like officers working to prevent poaching. Deforestation is not a thing that is going to happen within a national park. There are so many strict and severe protections that ensure that animals can live within a national park. But then the first thing that first opposition wanted to talk to you was that they protect endangered animals because these endangered animals cannot live better in the wild. In my argument, I'm going to specifically tell you why endangered animals are worse off in zoos and why the comparative of national parks are better. Before that, let us just deal with two big things that came from opposition in this debate. Firstly, they told you that they can create awareness by ensuring that you have a placard with a story. Three responses to this idea. Firstly, we believe that when you see an animal in a cage and you find that that animal is healthy and happy about what it is doing, you feel that things are fine with that animal. You don't feel the need to step in, intervene, and act at the point at which you see things are all fine. But then secondly, what you literally, like, animals look like objects in a zoo because you're allowed to pet them the way they wanted to talk. You have a petting zoo because you can do whatever you want with that animal in that petting zoo, which means that you see animals as objects and not as living beings. But then thirdly, we believe the kind of people who go to national parks are completely different from those who go to zoos, which means that even though we have lesser number of people going to national parks, they are the ones who are actually invested in making some kind of change. these are the conservationists who have some kind of power in order to ensure that they can change policy. Team opposition wants to talk about, they're just blowing up impacts. But then finally, we tell you that when they want to run a model where they have a perfect zoo where nothing is problematic, what they're making is that they're making each and every entry ticket far more costlier than what is happening right now, which means you don't have the same number of people going to zoos. That impact doesn't stand. But then let us look at the second idea that came. They told you that there is no proof of sentience, which means that we need not care about animal rights. Two responses to that. Firstly, we believe that animals can actually visibly express their pain, right? When you hit a dog, it cries. This is an expression of the pain, and we understand that animals are able to suffer. But even though, like we tell you what we care about, like the reason why we'll allow people to have pets, is the fact that we recognize that dignity is what we must protect for animals, which means that like pet owners have this active incentive to ensure that their dog is well fed. They care about their dog, and what we're looking at is a dignity of life rather than the right to life itself. We believe that we need to protect it. But then secondly, realize that we gave you structural reasons why it is literally impossible to have a zoo in a city and ensure that you have sufficient space for all the enclosures within the zoo. We believe, like we also specifically told you why the kind of people who come here were the things like you want to see a lion walking around within its enclosure rather than a lion that is sleeping within its cage. Things that were not responded to at first opposition. These are specific reasons why zoos are like going to be like this, whatever they do in their model. And finally, that idea that profit is good. So look, malnourished animals is the worst case in on-site proposition. So, like things that happen are like not allowing animals to speak. It's like sleep properly. It's not that we're going to hit animals. You're not going to give them the same kind of freedom that they have when they're in the wild. And that is the comparative that you need to look at, deal with our best case in your next speech. Going on to my argument. Before that, yeah, point of information.
Sort of people that you want to benefit are people who don't already care about animals. The only people who are going to visit the national parks are people who already care. What additional benefit do you have?
Okay, two responses to that. Firstly, you don't have numbers on your side of the house because you're making it significantly costlier for people to go to zoos. Because if you want like zoo owners to ensure that you have bigger enclosures, it means that they need to buy acres and acres of land in order to ensure that they can expand the zoo. This is extremely costly. Then secondly, realize that these people, the fact that you have more and more people going to national parks, means like the people who go to national parks are the ones that have the power to bring about some kind of change. And like people who go to zoos are children and other common individuals who are not able to invest the same amount of time and same amount of money in environmental conservation, no impact on yourself. Moving on to my argument about how we protect endangered animals better. Under this, firstly, let us look at how the life of an endangered animal looks like in the status quo. Often there are very few animals left in the wild habitat, which means that there are very few Siberian tigers and Himalayan yaks to start with in the first place. And moreover, these animals need specific conditions in order to live. We're talking about things like a minimal change in climate makes it difficult for the lemurs in Madagascar to survive, to live a better life, which means that climate and habitat are specifically important for these animals, and change in climate and habitat has made them has endangered them in the first place and made it difficult for them to survive. But then secondly, why do zoos have a specific incentive in order to get these endangered animals on board? Is because these endangered animals are often exotic, rare, and they're beautiful animals. These are things like macaws and one-horned rhinos that people don't commonly see, which means that when you have these endangered animals in your zoo, people are likely to come. And secondly, you want to differentiate yourselves from other zoos in order to ensure that there are more people coming to your zoo, which means that zoos have a specific incentive to take in these animals. But then why is this problematic? Here, let us look at the comparative between a national park and a zoo. First comparative about the manner in which breeding programs and reproduction happens. In natural forests, we believe that there is more interaction between animals of the same species, which means that natural reproduction is something that can happen only within a forest and a natural habitat. On the other hand, the alternative that team opposition must support is things like captive breeding programs and in vitro fertilization. what is the problem with this? First, it is extremely costly for you to run a successful in vitro fertilization program and to make sure that the breeding conditions are pretty good. But then secondly, we realized that in a large number of cases, the animals that have been born as a result of captive breeding, like in vitro fertilization programs, have several problems with them. Things like albino tigers being born because of captive breeding significantly impair the manner in which these animals can survive in the future. Then secondly, let us look at how the climatic conditions are. Realize that Zimbabwe is not the same as San Diego. You can't recreate the conditions of the Amazon in the London Zoo. These are things that are impossible because of geographic conditions, which means that endangered animals which specifically require this climate are denied of the kind of natural habitat they want, irrespective of how much you want to spend in this. But thirdly, we believe that this is the biggest problem is isolation that these animals face. Because right now, the number of these animals is very less, and the cost of procurement of these animals is also very high. Which means a zoo is going to have one speckled billed woodpecker, which is an extremely endangered animal, rather than a whole family of them. Which means that it's far more difficult for that animal to live as one single species when compared to living as a community within a forest. Which means that by the end of this debate, Team Proposition has told you that we are the ones who protect endangered animals better and zoos have structural problems. What they must come in their next speech and address is the fact that things like space is not available in the status quo and why animal dignity is not important. For all those reasons, vote Proposition.
We can't ask POIs.
If you had something, you should have thought about it in prep time.
It's really funny in today's debate when in first speech, government tells us we're okay with killing chicken as long as, we don't torture them too much before we kill them because we're still okay with people eating meat. We're okay with keeping dogs in the house and restricting their freedom of movement by keeping them in flats in cities as long as we don't really torture them. And then in the second speech, they come and push the burden on us that we now need to defend why this space is so important, why the right to have dignity is so important, when they themselves could never defend the very right to life that they let away in their first speech on that side of the house. I'm going to do two things today. Firstly, explain the metrics by which we are going to decide this debate and whether along those metrics should zoos be banned or not. Secondly, I'm going to deal with this entire comparative that came in the second speech about national reserves. And thirdly, I'm going to tell you what the trade-off is on our side of the house. Let's understand what are the metrics that they give us in their speeches. Right? They say two things. Firstly, it's problematic because animals have rights and you torture them. And secondly, because these are closer to cities, so space is a problem. So those were the two metrics they were willing to debate on. On the first one, they let it go by saying that, but at the point you are not torturing them too much, it's okay to eat meat, which means they don't defend rights absolutely. They're also okay taking away the right to live off certain animals. What do we tell you on our side on rights in that scenario? When we tell you that we see examples of animals living on a utilitarian basis, which means that, for example, a tiger will probably eat its cub as long as it survives in the wild, right? Which means that we have proof that they do survive on a utilitarian basis. Even if we do have proof of some degree of sentience, we don't have a claim that they make to that right to dignity. The reason we give human beings right to dignity, and the reason we don't allow things like slavery, is because there is a claim for that right. Something that we never receive from animals, and that's problematic, which is why we don't think that at the point we can obviously see them living in a utilitarian way, and as long as survival is still something that does exist, it's okay. Secondly, what do we tell you about the right to, for example, freedom of movement, right? And like the right to have absolute freedom. Having a natural reserve also does restrict it to some extent, right? Because there is still a boundary that you're going to have beyond which you're not going to let them go. There is still going to be a fencing. They needed to tell us what is this metric that they now use that, oh, 1 kilometer is okay, but maybe like 50 meters is not okay for me, right? We tell you that as long as the animal is not harmed significantly physically, right? So obviously that example of the London Zoo is one really bad example. We think that there is enough calling out of that example. We are not standing for blinding tigers in a zoo on our side of the world either. We tell you that it's okay, we're going to have zoos, we're going to give you a decent amount of space, which is like basically important for their basic needs of getting food, sleeping, survival. That is the least amount of rights that you give animals in today's world in any scenario. And that's why we tell you that on rights, that's something that we are more consistent with, and that's something that we can show that we still provide on our side, and that's the metric which falls on our side. Secondly, they argue close to cities, and this whole bit on natural reserves, right? I have 4 responses to that. Firstly, it's not a mutually exclusive option, right? So we can still show you that while there are certain benefits that zoos have, and they are still well within the rights of animals that you can like legitimately give them, we should still have zoos. But secondly, let's look at what, like if we actually have to deal with their best case, what are the constraints that are there on natural reserves as well? One, these are huge amounts of land that you're talking about, right? So government incentives to give up that land are much less at the point they have nothing to benefit out of it in the long term either. The reason why you don't have natural reserves, like a lot of natural reserves, is because it takes significant amount of investment without the same kind of return that a zoo probably would have had. Secondly, we tell you things like tourism are still allowed in the natural reserves that they have, right? Which means that disruption and living a kind of artificial lifestyle was a problem. I don't know why they're okay with like artificial mating within that natural reserve instead of just letting them live on their own. Thirdly, you, like they said, right, using the same analysis that they gave you, for example, things like climate change. The reason you can't protect all kinds of animals in natural reserves is because at the end of the day, it's still a natural environment, right? And what you can do in zoos separately, they say you can never recreate climate. No, you can. All you need to do is have the right amount of humidity, right amount of sunlight, right amount of rainfall, and the right amount of temperature. Or, like if you can grow crops in an artificial environment, you can obviously create that same kind of environment for animals to live and survive in as well, as long as they are not torture. Torture is not something we stand on our side of the house as well. That's something government needs to get clear in this debate. Lastly, they tell us that, look, but on your side, everything's going to become super expensive. On a relative scale, as long as we have a decent enough zoo which gets enough funding based on the incentives that zoos actually have, we do think that it is more accessible to a larger number of people. It is not as far away from like a place where I'll have to fly to some place and then go to a national park to visit, right? Which means that there will be individuals who are in the city who are willing to go and watch the zoo. They try to tell you that everyone who visits a natural reserve are the people who really care about these animals, right? No. Most people in India who go to the Ranthambore National Park go there because they want to see a tiger at the end of the day. So it's not that like that's a net benefit on your side of the house. Before I move into the other constructive, do you have a POI? No. Okay.
People who can't speak or express themselves are still given rights. How are they different from the case of animals?
Right, correct. Because it's a species as a whole which at some point has, so for example, another human being who's the same biological species as the human being who can't speak is given a right because biologically they're still same and they have claimed that right. As long as any tiger, for example, is willing to tell me that they need that right, we're okay with that. The problem is that we don't get that, right? And as long as we don't know if that biological species needs it, we're still okay trading it off. But what are we trading it off for really in this debate? we have told you on our side that one, there are net benefits to zoos. One, in terms of having more access to people. What does that access lead to? It does lead to more amount of education as well as awareness. That access is because of proximity that people have. It's based on the kind of entertainment that the zoos otherwise do provide. For example, petting stations, where, by the way, we are happy having enough supervisors to not torture these animals. We think at the point that we are principally legitimate in terms of the number of rights that we have taken away from these animals and can defend ourselves on those rights. We think that these are benefits that we do receive on our side of the house. We've also told you why the benefit to certain endangered species is more on our side of the house, where you have an incentive to try to continue breeding them within the zoo in order to keep a population to a certain level. For these reasons, as long as they can't show us that they themselves are not taking away any rights at all, we're extremely proud of this.
Speak on opposition, they're gagging a sentient being with emotions and feelings into small cages of oppression, mischaracterization, and depression. When they tell you that these animals don't deserve rights to leave these cages and to claim their own dignity, because you can't see them crying, because their inability to communicate to you means they do not have any rights to feel these emotions, to keep themselves away from this oppression whatsoever. But then they argue to you that on a principle level, they still win because we're okay with non-vegetarians. But that's a clear mischaracterization. But then let's look at the three clashes in this debate. First, what rights do animals get and when do they get them? Second, can zoos really be bettered even under opposition's model? And third, on which side do you increase political capital? Let's take a look at the first. What rights do animals get? So they spend a minute and a half in their first speech telling us that, look, you only get a right when you claim it. That's their first idea, that if animals don't feel anything, and if they're unable to communicate their feelings to us, they can't claim certain rights. Firstly speaker, note the assertion that they're telling you that you need to claim a right without telling you specifically why you need to do so. We think that it's not necessary that you need to claim a right in order to get it. More importantly, it's important. If you need a particular right, it should be given to you. We tell you that at the point at which their mental health affects their capacity to live, their physical health affects their capacity to live, they already deserve to get these rights. They give you no response to that in spite of the fact that this was established at the very beginning of this debate. What's the second response to their idea? Speaker, note that animals do feel. Dolphins at SeaWorld are disappointed that opposition thinks that their dead family doesn't affect them whatsoever, that they deserve to live where they were born, that they deserve to not see their family die because of the chemicals in the water at SeaWorld that keep them awake at night, so that people who come can watch them play around with a ball of jump through hoops. Then third speaker note that the right to dignity or movement is a right that we give to you under our give to these animals under our side of the house. So when they argue to you that just because we allow non-vegetarianism, we're banning them from like moving or having dignity, we think that that's just a false comparative. Why is that true? Because when we say that we allow like people to keep pets, we're still allowing the government to take away those pets in cases of animal abuse. We're still allowing we're still allowing pets to like live in other areas. We're still allowing for like veterinarians to take care and diagnose pets of depression. We're still allowing these people to be fined for like animal abuse. They don't deal with any of that. More importantly, speaker, note that non-vegetarianism is a large-scale culture. Should we be fine with banning non-vegetarianism? It doesn't affect our case substantially. But at the point at which we don't ban non-vegetarianism, we still don't take away the right to dignity and movement, the rights that we've been arguing to protect on our side of the house. So they can't tell us that since we're not allowing, in cases we're allowing them to die, we shouldn't allow them to have dignity while they do live. While they live, speaker, we think that dignity is necessary. So what's the comparative here? We think that on our side of the house, we've defended the rights that animals deserve to get. We've told you from our first speech why right to dignity and movement ensure that these animals can live for longer periods of time. They didn't deal with this at all. Instead, they pushed the burden on us to defend rights that we didn't take up to defend why zoos cannot ensure, why increased profit incentive in zoos cannot stabilize the rights that animals need to get. We think that these burdens, at no point, I'll take in a moment, fell on our side of the house. We prove to you on a principle note why animals deserve dignity. So we already won that. Moving on to why zoos can never be better even under their model. Yes.
If we give all protection that you just spoke about for pets to animals in zoos, then are you okay with zoos?
Okay, speaker, note that protection is precisely what is impossible in zoos. The kind of things that affect you in zoos are substantially different from the kind of things you experience as a pet. A pet is not the animal that has been caged inside a zoo, speaker. It's substantially different. In fact, we tell you that if pets can be placed in national reserves, it's better for pets. But we tell you that pets still have a better life than the kind of abuses that animals face in zoos. It's not something that can be guaranteed. It's precisely what our second class is going to be telling you. Why can't zoos be better? First, speaker, we brought to you the kind of profit incentives that zoos have. Why they are required to place animals in smaller cages rather than large expansions of land. Why they are required to keep these animals awake. Why they're ensuring that these animals perform certain tricks, interact with their visitors, and so on. On opposition, they tell you that all of this is going to happen, but animals also get time to sleep, time to ensure that they have places to ensure that they can move around, etc. But then they tell you that they're going to ensure that without increasing the cost substantially and therefore denying access to people. Because as I mentioned that, the point at which they argue that people are still going to come here and zoos can still follow their function, when they increase costs substantially, is a point at which they're telling you that these costs don't matter to people whatsoever. But that's just not true. People need certain amounts of money to afford this. And at the point at which they can't afford to come here, they can't afford to ensure that these animals have better places to live, that they have better like living conditions even within their cages, that they have the kind of environments that they need. So, speaker, the comparative there is to say that on our side, we solve the specific problems that zoos face, which is profit incentives that can't be that they don't factor in when they say that, look, we're going to improve these conditions regardless. We factor in the reasoning behind why like petting zoos still don't work because their function in and of petting and like subjugation is problematic, right? Third area of clash, but before that, yes.
Natural reserves are fenced as well. That also restricts to what extent those animals can move. Why is that different?
Okay, so on the that side of the house, I think natural reserves are as restricted as zoos. Speaker, let's take a step back and think of where these natural reserves exist. They're just miles and miles away from city. We concede that. That's not a problem. That's in fact the advantage of these natural reserves, because they expand over massive areas of land compared to zoos, which are restricted to small portions within cities where people can easily access them. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. So the point at which they tell you natural reserves are still fenced, they are pushing on us this false burden that we need to allow animals to roam around literally wherever they want, which is problematic. Okay. So the third area of clash was whether there'll be political, on which side of the house there'll be more political capital. Speaker, there are certain benefits. The idea that we heard from them is that there are no benefits that we see in reserves when compared to zoos. Speaker, there are three main benefits that you can see when we compare reserves to zoos. First is that of biodiversity. The insurance that we have in zoos is that there are a large number of animals that can reproduce, that can survive, that have this flora and fauna, the kind of environment that they would have in their home. Even if they're out of their home, this natural reserve is still far, far better than confining them to cages within cities, which are small areas in which you cannot have multiple kinds of trees, multiple kinds of insects, multiple kinds of animals having abilities. Third reason why it's better is because in the countryside, Speaker, there are fewer people who are going to come there, fewer people who are going to pollute. So when they tell you that, look, the point at which we are telling you, like, photo flashes annoy these animals, noises annoy these animals, and that sort of thing is problematic. We think that that they've already lost this debate. The money that these people spend to go to sanctuaries is what keeps sanctuaries functioning. So comparative, Speaker, is that on our side of the house, sanctuaries ensure that animals have the rights that they deserve.
We think this debate comes down to two major issues. We think it comes down to what are the sort of rights that animals in short demand or deserve. The second, which side is able to provide those rights better. Tinalo came and engaged with the sort of comparative that Himani gave to you in her speech. She came and told you that often what animals do want isn't necessarily the sort of dignity that side government is championing, but the sort of utilitarian metric of judging things, right? And we've given you examples that they'll never deeper. tell you that often animals often do judge things on the basis of what is going to help them to survive the best. Right? We think often when it comes to crocodiles eating their own children when they're starving, or the fact that a lion would eat his own food before he would allow anyone else to eat, shows metrics and shows actual proof that often animals do live on a metric where they want to survive the longest, the fact that they want to see the next day. We don't think animals are necessarily prioritizing dignity when it comes to their life. Right? Given that we've proven to you that often through several examples, animals do tend to prioritize the fact that they survive or not far more than anything else, like eating their children. We think the metric that should be used, or the demand these animals put forth in the real world, is which side is able to help them survive better, which side is able to give the largest number of animals the most amount of protection. Right? We don't think that's a comparator that they deal with, and we've given you substantial proof as to why that is the demand. Right? They can't come out and say things like, oh, they're sentient, without dealing with the actual comparator. Given the major demand from animals is survival, let's deal with that. Right? We tell you that we're going to help animals survive far better by A, protecting for endangered species more, and B, creating more awareness. Taking into account the creating awareness part, right? They come out and they tell us, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have national parks and they're going to be far better. We have three responses to that, something they never dealt with. Right? Often national parks are so far away and they're so few in number that most people aren't ever able to visit them. The response to that is, oh, we will have the best sort of people go visit them. Understand? Himani asked you this and you didn't respond, right? So often you can't prove to us whether rich people who visit these national parks are ever going to care about these animals. And we tell you that no, that's not necessarily true. We think the number that we provide on our side is much better. Then they come out and tell us, oh, but the tickets are going to be too expensive, so you won't have enough people visiting these zoos. Two responses to that, right? We don't think that when you increase the prices a lot, they will never increase the prices a lot. Why? Because often when you're a zoo, you're competing with other forms of entertainment, probably films or other things, which means if your price of your ticket is far too high, you have less people visiting the zoo. The way generally zoos work, that sure, there's a large amount of investment that's involved in like buying that plot of land, but the way they do it is that they have a lot of visitors coming, which means the margin is low, but they have a lot of people turning up, which means they have an incentive to ensure that once they put in that initial cost, the cost of running that zoo is pretty low. Not that extremely important because it deals with a large number of things that they say. We think that zoos have an incentive to minimize the cost of running, which means that we're not going to have situations like one male woodpecker in a zoo, because they often have an incentive to have a female there because they want to breed these woodpeckers and increase the number. We also we won't have situations where they're going to have extremely insensitive breeding programs where they create animals that aren't going to survive long and get tortured to death because they have an incentive to produce an animal that's able to survive longer, especially because breeding programs often do have a large amount of cost involved and they want to maximize the output from that, which means that they necessarily do have an incentive to ensure that these animals are treated well. The second thing that they come out and tell us is, oh, you know what, zoos are so bad because there's never any metric that we can have or any way to like control the amount of torture that happens in zoos. We don't think that's true. So if you prove that the amount of protection that we have in zoos is the same as the amount of protections that we have in home and probably more, we take this away, right? We tell that in zoos often because it's often in the public light because these animals are showcased day in and day out. When you see in the zoo that one animal is limping, there's a lot of public attention that happens to that particular area. For example, the fact that they were able to point to the London example and point to the amount of pain that happens throughout the world is the fact that there's a lot of attention on these zoos. There's a lot of incentive that these organizations often have to ensure that these zoos are taken care of. What do we say next? We tell you that there's a lot of amount of awareness that is extremely important that is created through our mechanism and never happens on their side. Right? What happens on their side is often a few number of people going to these national parks that are very far away, but that doesn't create the awareness. We think often the issue with like poaching and the sort of animal tortures that end up happening is because a lot of people don't sympathize with it. Why is it the national parks are never going to create that sympathy? Two responses to that, right? First, you're never going to actually be certain whether you're going to see an animal or not, right? Or probably even if you see the animal, it's probably going to be for a second or two, which means you're never really able to form that sort of bond with the animal. On the contrast, when you're talking about zoos, we often think that you're going to be spending significant time with the animal in petting zoos. You're going to have a significant amount of interaction, be able to see the animal, which necessarily results in better bonds and take a few.
With children, we have here watching lions sleep in a dark cave or walking around in a cage growling.
We can see that probably zoos have an incentive to ensure that these animals are awake. But we also think that they have an incentive to ensure that these animals are kept under better conditions and not tortured to the extent that you want a site to defend. There are significant laws and like restrictions that are imposed on zoos in terms of how they treat the animal, and that's the sort of zoo that we defend. Right? Then we want to tell them this, right? They come out and they tell us that, you know what, national parks are best capable of taking care of endangered animals. Two responses to that, right? First of all, what happened in South Africa? South Africa has a whole lot of national parks and they have a whole lot of rhinos. But over a period of time, the numbers started decreasing. Why? That's because often when these national parks are so huge, you can never really patrol the borders of the scene. They just come out and they mention, oh, we're just going to save these animals because they're national parks. But deal with what actually happens in status quo. Because of the fact that these national parks are so huge, because of the fact that they have like very weak fencing in certain areas, a lot of poachers are able to enter and are able to kill a lot of animals. The reason why that's so important is because South Africa's national parks weren't able to protect these animals or breed these animals. That is why we needed to have a sort of artificial breeding system in place. And we think that zoos, in fact, are best placed to do this. We tell you about how the profit incentive often comes into zoos, where they have an incentive to create as many of these endangered animals because they do end up attracting a lot of spotlight, which means that these zoos have an incentive to breed them. Secondly, we tell you that we don't have the issue of poaching and the issue of like these animals being killed for their horn. That does happen in national parks, as is proven by the history of the richest countries not being able to protect their animals from poachers. At the point of time at which we proved it through 3 speeches, there's going to be far more awareness, far more attachment with these animals that's going to happen on our side. When we proved that endangered species can never be adequately protected on this side because these national parks simply don't do enough. And we proved that these sort of like zoos are essential for the survival of the species, and that is the metric that these animals tend to prioritize. We tell you that we take this debate an extremely well.
Mr. Speaker, the burden on side gov was to prove why zoos are inherently bad and cause significant harm to the animals living inside to invite a blanket ban on them. To that extent, we tell you that side gov has plainly failed. All right. Now, the two things that come out of side gov is that they're against torture, and B, that they're against this idea of constrained space that these animals live in. Now, dealing with their idea of torture, we, through our 3 speeches, have proven to you and have told you why we, A, are against torture, and B, in zoos, these animals aren't physically harmed as they would like you to believe. They aren't beaten, and they aren't made to perform in front of a crowd. They aren't made to live, stay awake for 20 hours a day just to please the crowd. All right. Now, the same rights that they extend to pets of not being physically harmed, of being visited by a vet, of government intervention, we tell you that all of that exists on our side of the house as well, whereas these rights already exist in zoos where the government does intervene, where there are numerous animal rights groups that do hold these zoos accountable, that do make sure that these animals aren't beaten, and the zoos themselves have an incentive to make sure that these animals are kept healthy and well fed and all of that. Secondly, moving on to the second argument of this constrained space not allowing the animals to live their healthy lives and their natural lives, we tell you that they fail to prove why this premise of that animal having that right to that space exists, and two, where they are willing to draw the line. We've taken this down in 3 arguments, or in 3 ways. All right. Firstly, we've told you that this absolute right to this freedom of movement simply doesn't exist, which was their premise to this argument. We've told you why it doesn't exist, because these animals often live in these live lives in these utilitarian senses, and we tell you that instead of living in the entire savannah, these animals will be just as fine living in a radius of 50 miles, 50 meters, or whatever. Now, They, from side Gov, were advocating for natural reserves, but at the same time, they failed to prove why the limitation of a natural reserve of being 100 kilometers wide is different from being from that of a zoo of being 50 meters wide, and why that is justified. Secondly, we've told you the limitations that natural reserves face. A, they're out in the wilderness where not a lot of people visit them. B, the climate alterations and the climate changes that we from side op can recreate in zoos for these endangered animals are extremely hard and difficult for these natural reserves to create on an immense scale. C, we've told you why governments are unlikely to invest in these natural reserves and why this has led to not a numerous number of these natural reserves all over the country. And lastly, we've told you why zoos are better placed to invite crowds and to spread awareness. Thirdly, we've told you why. We've told you the inherent benefits of zoos that exist solely on our side of the house and not on Gov when they come out and advocate for natural reserves. Why? Because we've got more number of people going to these zoos, interacting with these animals, forming a connection with them, and investing in their stories. All right. Secondly, we've shown you how in our paradigm in zoos we have more animals being held, and if the trade-off exists, and if the trade-off then becomes of taking away these certain rights, of the right to dignity, of the right to freedom, we've told you why we're fine with that, and we've told you and we've given you a metric to judge that. All right. For all of these reasons, we tell you that we take this debate, and side Gov has failed to prove the burdens that they took on. For all of these reasons, we take it.
In one of the most regulated zoos in the world, in places like SeaWorld, you have dolphins that are poisoned with chemicals so that they can keep awake at night. And yet, all that opposition has succeeded in coming here and saying is that the inability to communicate or demand for rights justifies in us not giving them these rights. We tell you that that is not true. All opposition told you today about the rights of animals was that it's fine to take away their dignity and that they don't have the same rights because they cannot demand these rights like human beings can. First, we told you that even if they live a utilitarian life, they still want to live that life. They still have the right to live that life, and we believe that we need to provide that to them. Right? We told you that they have the same emotions as human beings do. They experience the same pain as human beings do, and they never showed to you why it's okay to inflict this pain upon them. And then in a POI, when we asked them, why a human being who cannot communicate his feelings, why a deaf or dumb human being who cannot demand his rights should be given the same rights, they conceded to the fact that even if he can't demand his right, he should be given the right. And we tell you that should be given to animals too, even if they cannot demand it, because the cry of a lion when he is hurt is enough demand for right for a human being to provide it to him. Right? Secondly, coming to their model. They gave you this fancy model where they would have zoos with sufficient open space, complete food and safety for the animals. But we told you time and time again that first of all, in cities, you cannot have this open space. In cities where zoos are located, you cannot have the sufficient space for animals. We told you that. They refused to respond. Now, they conceded that you cannot have a good zoo. You cannot have a good zoo without a large amount of money. And we told you that with this large amount of money that you're spending explicitly on zoos, you're going to have more expensive tickets, you're going to have less people coming, and thus there is going to be less exposure, which will reduce furthermore on their side of the house. Now again, we came to this point about protection of endangered animals. And they simply told you, they simply asserted the fact that animals find it difficult to survive, even in the wild, in the savannah, and in the polar ice caps, the polar bears find it hard to survive. We fail to see how this is true when that is their natural habitat. We told you in our second speech that they need specific conditions and specific climatic requirements to live, and they simply asserted to the fact that you can provide these climatic requirements in a zoo. We do not see how that is possible. You cannot you cannot replicate the exact climatic requirement that these endangered animals require. And we also told you that zoos have a greater incentive to get these endangered animals, and that is bad because they're more exploitative of these endangered animals. But even more importantly, we told you that these animals are going to live in an isolated life. To which the only response that they had is that fine, we'll have 2 woodpeckers so that they can breed. We tell you that 2 woodpeckers isn't enough. Imagine them living in a forest with their entire family to just 2 woodpeckers living in a cage. We tell you that there is a difference. They are making a large trade-off, especially when it comes to endangered animals. They said that profit incentive is enough to keep them healthy. We told you that profit incentives are bad, that it reduces the cost spent on keeping these animals safe. And all they said on their side is that we'll help create awareness for endangered animals. While we told you that you cannot create awareness through a placard, so seeing an animal through a cage who's probably healthy, you do not get invested in any story about any animal. We told you that petting zoos make animals look like objects, and we told you that there will be less exposure to zoos under their system, and there will be as much exposure, if not more, in natural awareness. So the trade-off here is that they want a little bit more awareness, which we think is going to be redundant in the long term, while we actually are fighting for saving animals. We're fighting for the lives of animals, and we believe that our impact is much greater and much more beneficial to everyone, which is why we're proud to propose.